lore never changes. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Lore Watch. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my waste-wandering companion with me, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm very much in a Fallout mood. Let me put it that way. Very ready to talk about Fallout.
I think we're both in sort of that mood. If you can't tell from the intro or the opening there, we're going to be talking about Fallout in our continued series here, and we're going to be moving on to Fallout 3. I believe Matt wanted to share something before we got into the meat of it, so let her rip.
Fallout 3 is a fascinating thing to look at for me because it was the first Fallout game since the collapse of Interplay, who were the original game company that owned the rights. And it was a Bethesda game, which, of course, it hadn't been previously. Bethesda made a lot of changes to Fallout. But without them, Fallout wouldn't be a going thing right now. So I do appreciate a lot of the things they did. However, Fallout 3 is the worst Fallout game. And I'm saying that not as someone who hates it. I actually like it quite a bit. I've played it quite often. But it's the worst Fallout game because of one story decision that is nonsensical. And I don't know, Joe, do you want to actually drop the bomb of what that thing was up front, or do you want to just go into it and talk about it and get there?
I think we can go ahead and drop the bomb. So which one ruined it for you? I'm curious if it's sort of the same one that I take umbrage with.
At the I would say the penultimate chapter of the game, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the game, and we're going to talk about it, so I don't want to just jam it in here now, but you make a series of decisions that allows you to find the person you've been looking for, only for that person to essentially end up sacrificing themselves to prevent the thing they've been working on to help the wasteland in the DC area being used by the wrong people, and to save your life. They sacrifice themselves. You are then in a position where you can go in and fix it so the thing will still work and the person you were looking for's legacy will be maintained, but you will have to die from radiation poisoning. Mm-hmm. Except by this point you have a companion who is utterly immune to radiation poisoning, and he won't go in and do it because this is your choice.
Yeah, that I think this is the one thing that I think everybody has a universal problem with the game. And not to say that the rest of the game is not entertaining or have its merits, but it is definitely my least favorite Fallout of the ones we've had available, and that is a large reason why. Some of the choices didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Or it's just straight up nonsensical BS. It's not even, it doesn't make sense. It's just ridiculous. Okay, all right, fine. You, Mr. Radiation Proof person, won't go in there. I know multiple members of the Brotherhood of Steel, and they wear power armor, which has radiation protection. Why can't I wear that in?
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. It's any of your companions. And we're going to talk on this, because the game introduced a party system, which was a little bit odd for Fallout as far as it goes at this point.
Fallout used to have maybe one or two companions, but you didn't actually have a party of people.
Yeah, so let's get into some of the meat of it, because I think this all sort of ties in. But that is the big bomb of this one. So it is the very first game that Bethesda did for the Fallout series. It is also the first time that it was done in a first-person shooter aspect ratio. So up to this point, Fallout had been a tactical third-person isometric adventure game.
Very, very similar. If you've played Baldur's Gate 3, that kind of perspective, more primitive, but still that perspective.
Very much based off of its real-time strategy roots, and that essentially is out the window here. And it was a very exciting time for a lot of people, but also not for others, where this was a big change. And this is sort of, I want to say, Bethesda's was this their big first foray into first-person shooters?
Only if you don't count the Elder Scrolls games, which have the same basic perspective and use the same engine. But Fallout, because Fallout is much more about, it's a post-apocalyptic wasteland in an alternate world where the 1950s just kind of held on for 100 years. You use a lot of guns. Mm-hmm. There are many guns. You can melee in Fallout, but it is not recommended. In any Fallout, I mean, you could melee in the first two, but nobody did. It's because guns were much better. But there were a couple of melee weapons and a few people soldiered on. But regardless, I would say that the problem I have with Fallout as a shooter in the first place, and especially with Fallout 3, is something they tried to address. And this is not really a lore thing, except it kind of is. It's V.A.T.S.
Mm-hmm.
V.A.T.S is something they kind of incorporated from the original two Fallout games, because they had a system where, because it's basically was a turn-based game, you could just aim at stuff. You didn't have to aim in real life, because it wasn't that kind of game. It was turn-based. When they brought it to the first-person shooter thing, a lot of original players were like, I don't want to play a shooter, because I don't play these games to have really good hand-eye coordination. This is not Rogue, it's not Rogue 6 or whatever. And so they took the original concept of having the Pip-Boy, which Joe can tell you about because he owns one. I'm jealous. And they used it to say that with your Pip-Boy, you could basically interface with it so that it would target for you. And it's an example of a lore decision being used to justify a game mechanics. And it's interesting. I will give Bethesda credit on that. It's an interesting way around their problem, because if you wanted to not use it and just target like in another shooter, you could, and it could work. I personally never thought it worked very well, but I know people who prefer to play it that way, and that's fine. But if you didn't want to do that, you could get skills in the game the same way they did before and make yourself better and have V.A.T.S just do the targeting for you.
Yeah, was this really the first true big, broad introduction of special as well, right?
I mean, before the special existed, the previous two games used it, but here's where it basically became...
seeing.
Yeah, well, previously it was just... Special was literally just another way to do the same kind of things as GURPS. And to the point where I think they even they renamed it Special because they realized that it was strength perception and all that stuff were just there, and just it formed the word special. But it was basically just another point-based role play system. You could have used the exact same system outside in the pen and paper game. I think they did.
They do. In the tabletop game, you use the special as your stats.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same. But when they brought it to Fallout 3, it should also be said Fallout 3 had way bigger numbers concurrent play. More people played Fallout 3 than had ever played any Fallout game before, by a lot. Possibly because Bethesda was a bigger studio. Bethesda was a bigger studio, and it had been gone for so long that a lot of people that never got a chance to play it, this was going to be their chance to play it. So a lot of things brought people to see Special and to see V.A.T.S, and they made a lot of story decisions based on it.
Yeah, and it was for a lot of folks, and it should be said too that Fallout 3 was their first experience with Fallout.
Absolutely, it was for a lot of people.
It received a ton of marketing, especially because it was coming back after a long hiatus. And I will give Bethesda credit; they definitely did try to at least honor the first, two games. Right? They tried. Mm-hmm. They did their best to do it, and we were looking at this is a much different Bethesda than it is now. So,
I would actually disagree with you. What I would say was that it's the same Bethesda, but that's a problem. That is the same Bethesda, because things are supposed to change and grow and develop, not be the same people or some of the same people over a course of 20 years.
Fair enough.
And keep in mind, it's been 20 years. It came out when? 2005? When did the original Fallout come out? Fallout 3 come out? Because
the original Fallout 3, I believe, was released 2008. I want to say, 2008.
So almost 20
years. But let's get into where the story kind of picks up, and we can talk more about the game and some of the decisions, but it's just something to bear in mind as you move along, that this is Bethesda trying to figure out what they're doing with this. So the year the game starts is in 2258, and you are playing the Lone Wanderer. You are actually, this is a first for me in a game of this nature, you are privy to your own birth, which is just random. But you're there, you see your father, James, who is the doctor and scientist who delivers you with his friend, Madison Lee. However, your mother dies of a heart attack or a cardiac arrest basically soon after you're born. And then what you don't see is James taking you, the lone wanderer, to Vault 101, an experimental vault in which nobody is ever intended to leave. It is supposed to be a rest of their life vault. That's how the game opens, and it's a very odd thing. So like you grow up in the vault and you have these moments, right, where like I believe it's the birthday party is like the big thing where you get control of your character for the first time, and you're a child at this point and you're learning essentially, I think this is where you get your Pip-Boy, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've played Fallout 3. You get your Pip-Boy, you get to learn about bullies and how they interact with each other. You get to interact with your friend Amada, and it's at this point by the year, I think it's 2277. You wind up leaving afterwards, like you time jump again. And this is where you're leaving the vault. And it gets, I don't know how else to describe it, Matt. Like how else would you describe this sort of intro?
It's kind of like a tutorial, but they want to make the character creation process the tutorial. So like when you're born, it then cuts to you as a younger child in the vault, and you essentially there's an aptitude test that you take, and I can never remember the acronym for it, but it's a big deal. They've done this aptitude test in every Fallout game, and you do the aptitude test, and the aptitude test is basically you picking your stats, but it's couched as this is a test you took that told you your stats. And you do that, and then you hang out with your friend who's the daughter of the vault overseer, and she and you are getting picked on by these kids who are like a bit older than you, like a few years older, and they say some mean things about you not really belonging there, and you don't get it. But then it cuts to, and again, this is all moving to teach you the systems. Like the bullies come up, so you learn how to fist fight. Mm-hmm. It's to show you this is how you attack.
Because melee is a thing in this game, and you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how the whole intro process works. I gotta say first some things right now that we haven't said yet. First off, your dad's voice is voiced by Liam Neeson.
Yes, it is Liam Neeson.
Even at the time, you will spend the entire game making references to Liam Neeson movies almost constantly. I every time James talks, and it only gets worse as time goes on, because I don't know if Taken was out yet then, but it's certainly around now. So when I did my last Fallout 3 playthrough, which wasn't that far ago, I couldn't help going, I've got a particular set of skills constantly whenever he would show up. But regardless, your father, meanwhile, has some kind of conflict going with the Overseer all this time. You constantly are aware of it, but you don't really know what it is.
Isn't it because like the Overseer is like incredibly paranoid?
Oh yeah, but we'll get to that. I'm just telling you this is how it works with your character. It's actually an interesting way. I will say this is one of Bethesda's better openings, because it's an interesting way to get to experience your character's life growing up, so you know what they're like and why they're like that. And doesn't mean that you don't get to make any decisions. It just means that through these events you understand, okay, the vault's like this. My character is obviously going to realize that they can't get any help inside the vault because nobody wants to leave it, and they're all weird about leaving. And so when eventually a day comes, I think you're like literally 18.
19.
Like, yeah, okay, you're 19, and your dad just vanishes, and you don't know where he went, and you don't like no real way to find him, and you're trying to get people to help you, and your friend, the daughter of the Overseer, is sympathetic, but is like, I mean, what are you going to do? Go out there? And essentially you'd say, yes, yeah, I guess I am. And there's like a few more confrontations and stuff you have inside the vault. Nothing major, but stuff to just to give you the basics of what you're going to be doing. And then you go up and you activate the vault door with your Pip-Boy. A door opens, and it's really interesting because in a way it's a total callback to both Fallout 1 and 2. It's a call out to Fallout 1 literally because it's the same basic scene of the vault door opening, except this time from your perspective. Like, this is one of the places where Bethesda's decision on the way that the game is played is actually beneficial, because it's first person with you don't even see your character, And so you just see the door opening and it sliding over and the light coming in, and you step out into a completely unknown world. You don't know anything about this place. You've never been there. As far as you know, you've never been there. And suddenly there you are. And another good decision they made is you start being able to pick up radio stations.
Yeah.
And one of the radio stations is it's hosted by a guy named Three Dog. Is it Three Dog, right?
I think so.
Yeah, and he's got kind of like this, Watching the Wastelands radio station. It's really interesting because he's a character, and you will run into him later in the game, or at least you can. The great thing about, I will say, all games from Fallout 3 on is that in the right hands, there's a lot of stuff to do and a lot of possible decisions you can make. Not other games may have done it better, but Fallout 3 definitely has that. You get that sensation and go through it. But that's like the intro. It's literally like a tutorial and the character creation kind of wrapped together. And when you get done, like I said, you step out into the wasteland. You've got I don't even know if you have a gun yet. Do you have a gun yet? Yeah, I didn't think you did. So I think you maybe have a wrench. And you step out into the wasteland, and if you're like me and you go in the wrong direction, you immediately run into a Cazador. But regardless, it's an interesting way to immerse you in what it is like to be a vault dweller coming up out of the vault, and not like in a real way. It is a very, I almost want to call it a pastiche of the original Fallout, which is also a little bit another one of my problems with it as a story. There are a lot of callbacks.
There are, and like we talked about before, that callbacks are not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
And I want to make that perfectly clear. It's just that there's Fallout 3 at this point. For people that haven't played a Fallout game, it's a really good introduction, but it falls into that trap of, if you've played Fallout and you're a huge fan of the series, this is where you start seeing maybe too many similarities to how the first game and the second game mostly the first game sort of opened up, because go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's kind of like how, if you haven't watched a lot of Star Wars movies, the Star Wars The Force Awakens, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you watched all the other Star Wars movies, you're like, my God, they're just doing
New
original
Hope.
Star Wars again. Yeah, it's New Hope again. And it's not exactly that, but the beats are all the same. It's like, so Fallout 3, despite the fact that it is not a story about a person going forth into the wilderness to find a chip, has a lot of the same basic feeling, because it is a story about someone going forth to find something and then something else becoming important during that time. And the ultimate end goal of Fallout 3 is not the original condition you thought it was going to be when you went out, just like in Fallout. In Fallout, you step out looking for a water chip, and then you find out, and there's a crazy guy making mutants. I gotta stop that. And so that element is there. Where Fallout 3 differs, and where I think its story genius is, the things it does well are, but one thing Bethesda does even better than Interplay did. And we'll talk about another company that does that even better than them. But Bethesda's really good at side quests.
The side quest. Oh, yes.
Yeah. The side quests in Fallout 3 are the best parts of Fallout. This is not to say that the main quest is bad, but it's something that always happens with Bethesda. It happened in Starfield, it happens in the Elder Scrolls games, and it happens in their Fallout games. The side quests that don't have bearing on the main story are always the best part, because those are the ones that give you the world. Those are the ones that let you make better decisions, or more decisions, or any decisions.
Or introduce you to NPCs that are colorful and interesting, and, give you sort of like a flavor that the main quest doesn't necessarily do that.
Yeah, and that's, I think, it's why it's hard to talk about Fallout 3 as a lore thing without, if you don't talk about the side quests, it feels very, it sounds like it's very on rails and very linear. Because, all right, I'm going to do something here. I'm just going to straight up lay out the story in its broadest terms. You are looking for your father. You go forth into the wasteland. You run into a whole bunch of situations. That's going to be the side quest. We'll come back. Eventually, you find out your father was not from the vault originally, that he came to the vault and they let him in. You don't know why that is. Your mother, however, seems to have been from the vault originally. They made a connection. She left with him because the reason he came to the vault was he was looking for a Garden of Eden creation kit. They didn't have one but they had records that told him where he could find it. He went looking for the vault where there would be a Garden of Eden creation kit or a GECK. You remember that from Fallout 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, does this sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah. You go to the place that he called, I think it's called Rivet City. It's literally an old aircraft carrier that is now just sitting in the Potomac. And you go there, you eventually find Dr. Madison Lee, the woman who helped deliver you as a child. And there's a whole, like, the Lone Wanderer and Madison Lee have a fascinating connection. It is one of the most interesting parts of the story in that she's cold, she's mercurial, she's even kind of mean, but also she remembers you as a baby. She has a massive unrequited love feeling for your father that is never really expressed properly. So she vacillates between not wanting to talk to you and wanting desperately to talk to you. And it's really interesting. You don't see this kind of character in a lot of video games. Somebody who is conflicted, somebody who is not, she's not super great or super nice, but she does legitimately want to help you and help everyone else. She isn't cold or cruel. She's repressed and doesn't know what the right decision is. She tells you that your father came back, that she saw him, and that he told her that he'd figured out their long dream was to fix the water in the capital wasteland. That's what the Washington D.C. is, which is where this game is set, by the way. Sorry. The game is set in Washington D.C. It's actually set there because Bethesda Studio is named that because it's in Bethesda, Maryland.
It's also set there because at the end of 2, and we talked about this a little bit, a lot of your companions and folks that you dealt with were heading this way.
Yeah. So you now find out your father has found, basically using the information he got from Vault 101, he's figured out how to do what they've wanted to do this whole time and fix all the irradiated water in the capital wasteland, because that's the big thing limiting people from recovering. They haven't been able to really recover and rebuild anything because they're so busy just trying to survive. And water that isn't incredibly radiated is very hard to find.
Yeah, let's take a moment and talk about that, because I don't think we have really. We sort of glossed over that a little bit in the first 2 games, but
because in the first 2 games it isn't as big a deal,
right?
In this particular case, the Capital Wasteland is set in Washington, D.C. If you want to name another place that would be targeted by more nuclear bombs than the capital of the United States, it would be the capital of countries the United States was bombing. So it's literally, the Capital Wasteland is one of the most wastelandy wastelands you're going to come upon in Fallout because it was repeatedly nuked. The White House ain't there anymore because
and not only that, but I mean, this is also why all the games that take place on the East Coast, we're talking Fallout 76, we're talking Fallout 4, and we're talking Fallout 3, they take place on the East Coast. The East Coast is also a set of primary targets in any nuclear war because of the sheer number of nuclear power plants that operate along the East Coast, more than anywhere else in the United States.
And for that matter, also, the biggest defensive targets that they needed to hit are there.
Air Force bases, naval bases, you're talking about the Pentagon, you're talking about various other military headquarters, the seats of governance are all located along sort of that eastern corridor. And so, yeah, this is why talking about this here, I think, is important, because that's why it's so irradiated. But then one of the comments and we'll talk about this later, but I remember when Fallout 4 came out, one of the things people complained about was, why is everything still so dirty? And the answer is because everything in the water is just, it needs to be purified before it can be used even to clean things, because the radiation, the chemicals, we discovered soap as a human, as humanity, from water coming down an ash-filled bank of a mountain or hill from where sacrifices were burned to the gods. And then we discovered that things were cleaner at the base of this. We found it by accident. Here, it's the same thing. All of the stuff that is everywhere, all of the heavy metals, the chemicals, the detritus of humanity, all of the garbage from the outside of the war, the aftermath of the war in several hundred years, because this is 200 years after the war at this point, I believe.
At this point, because the bombs flew in 2077.
Yeah.
So at
So
this point, you are nearly 200 years later. This will come up again when we get to fall.
yeah. But you're at a point where these particular areas still haven't recovered, and they need that clean water in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to grow again. Even so much as to just keep themselves clean.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a primal thing that you don't think about.
Yeah, and one of the things too is a lot of people complain about the dirtiness, but think of it this way: if you lived in a continuous, if you lived in a place that had been bombed to the point where like major buildings were pulverized, like there was just nothing left in wide swaths, but that's where all the resources were. You're going to go down into that stuff to get those resources, which means you're going to get dirty.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff you need to live is inside the ruins, and that includes bottled water from a couple hundred years ago. You know, that's the main source of water is stuff like that. Oh, we found an aquifer. Okay, we can draw the water out of that, and it's not irradiated. But that means, again, going forth into a place that is ruined and destroyed. And you can't spare the water to wash yourself. That's the only potable water for like a mile. Like, I'm going to use that to like get dirt off me? Fuck do I care if I'm dirty? Sorry.
That's our one.
But yeah, but seriously, so it's a fascinating thing to see that they're like trying to fix the water because that will make it possible to live in the wasteland and not merely just survive in it. And so as you're going forth, you're looking for your father, you're trying to find him, you eventually get to the vault where he is, and I'm never able to remember which one because there are a ton of vaults in Fallout 4. Fallout 3, sorry. But when you get to that vault,
I think it's 112.
It might be. I can't remember.
Yeah, but I'm 90% sure it's 112.
But when you get there, you find out that it is the vault run by Stanislav Vron, which we mentioned in previous Fallout episode. And Stanislav Vron was the head of the, what was it called? The reclamation, special reclamation. I can't remember what it's called. Stanislav
Braun was the former member of Vault-Tec that his particular, why can't I remember what it was?
Because I said that I couldn't remember it.
Yeah.
But he was
regardless
in charge. Yeah, he was in charge of the Vault-Tec program that came up with stuff like the GEC.
Yeah, he was credited as the sole developer of the GEC, the Garden of Eden creation kit.
When you find this vault, you find that all the people in there are in these kind of cryopod things, except they're hooked up to some giant AI kind of computer. And because it's Fallout, the computer is enormous because miniaturization wasn't a thing they did. But it's this incredible computer, and you realize one of the people in the pods is your father. He's actually in a pod. You can't get him up. You can't wake him up. So you're like, all right, I guess I have to get in one of the pods too. You're taken to what is possibly the creepiest quest in.
Oh yeah, Tranquility Lane. Do we want to talk about that in depth here? Because we might as well.
Yeah, you go for it, man.
So Tranquility Lane is, well, it's like if Leave It to Beaver had been on a very murderous acid trip. So you essentially, it's a virtual reality simulation where you went in there and you wind up coming across a little girl named Betty. Betty, in order to assist you with what you're there for, because Betty knows what you're there for, wants you to help with specific tasks for the residents here, because the world is dangerous and awful. But in here, everything on Tranquility Lane is perfectly fine. Everybody's happy. Everybody has fun here. Except you're going to need to go ahead and make this one kid cry first. And then it escalates from there. Betty starts asking you to do things, whether it's hurting people, injuring people, up to killing people, all for their own amusement. It is very weird. You can also, throughout this, you find out that I think there's one old woman, and I can't remember what her name is. She tells you that that Betty isn't who they say they are. That Betty tortures all of the residents of the lane for their own amusement. And at this point, if you haven't figured that out, well, yeah, I mean, that's on you. But I mean,
seriously, have you not been paying attention here?
But there's 4 tasks that you're asked to complete that sort of lead you down this road. There's the Make to Me Cry, which there's all different ways you can go about doing that. He wants you to break up the Rockwell's marriage, which is, I mean, Rockwell's a little on the nose. He wants you to kill Mabel Henderson, which is just an old person down in the area that, you know, just living her life, and is also one of the ones, I believe that is the one that tells you what's going on there. And then there's essentially the kill everybody. Basically wants you to go full slasher movie with the mask and the knife and everything, and literally go to a doghouse, get these items, and then kill everybody. Yeah, it's weird. And then you find out that there's a failsafe, that you don't have to do what Betty tells you to do.
Yeah, you do have an option.
And that it's Old Lady Dithers. That's right. Old Lady Dithers tells you that there is a failsafe in one of the houses that Betty tries to keep you from. And you can go and activate the failsafe. You want to talk a little bit more about that? Like,
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, so if you're thinking, well, I'm not going to murder everybody in the town in a slasher mask. I'm not a murderer. I'm going to do the other thing. The other thing murders everybody in the town.
Yeah.
It's just that the way it does it is basically you find out the people you're seeing in this town are the minds of people that have been in this thing for 200 years.
Yeah, their bodies don't survive anymore.
Yeah, they're essentially already kind of dead, but they're not quite already dead because their frozen bodies are essentially like superconductors, and so their brains are still kind of working, but they can't recover from this. And so they're dead anyway. So you're basically like, do I kill them all through this failsafe because then they'll really die out there? And that means he can't torture them. I shouldn't have said he, I'm sorry. But, you know, you already know Betty is. So you do it. If you do it, it triggers the original purpose of this computer because he's repurposed it. The original purpose of this computer is war games.
Yeah.
And so when you trigger it, the Chinese army shows up and kills everybody. And with
the exception of Doc the dog and Betty, they do not die. But there's a reason that Doc the dog doesn't die.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you come back out after you've triggered. After you've gone around killing everybody in town, like the homicidal maniac, or after you've triggered the failsafe and the Chinese army does it for you, you come out. Either Betty is really pleased with you, or Betty is horrified. And I'm going to tell you about the horrified answer because it's the best one. It's the best ending to this. It's what I always do just because, you know, middle finger extended to this guy. You find out that Betty is Stanislav Braun. And unlike all the other people, Stanislav has been in this thing for 200 years. Unlike them, he had root access and administrator control, so he could repurpose the computer to allow him to torture these people for the past couple hundred. And he's been doing this. Tranquility Lane is not the first simulation he ran. Like there was one that was like a beach one. He keeps doing this to them. He can even erase their memories of stuff that happens inside. And that's why Old Lady Dithers, the amount of erasing he's done gets to the point where they start remembering. And so Lady Dithers kind of knows what's going on, but is at the point where they can't really talk very effectively about it. And nobody else will listen because they're still brainwashed or whatever. So essentially, these people are all living in a constantly unending torture simulation and have been since the war.
Mm-hmm.
So now like 190, 180 years. So
everybody
in a way,
except for Braun is dead at this point.
Yeah. So
and
you go ahead.
I was going to say, and no matter the outcome, the ending is roughly the same, whether he is pleased or horrified, because Braun has a realization that now Braun is stuck in the simulation for eternity with no one, by themselves, in a prison hell of his own making.
No one to torture.
No one to
Play
torture.
with. No one to run weird experiments on, which is kind of like what he's been doing this whole time, because that's what every Vault tech scientist seems to be doing. Yeah, it's a wild ending, and I honestly recommend you do the failsafe option just to see a little girl rant at you in the voice of like the character from Doctor
An old German.
Yeah. But this is when it's revealed. You want to reveal it or want me to reveal
Yeah, I got this. So this is where you find out as you exit the game that your father's waiting for you. James is there, waiting for you to get out of the pod and start a conversation.
You gotta tell him about the dog, though.
Oh, go ahead.
The dog,
Doc the dog was him.
Doc the dog was him. It was your father the whole time. And that's why if you went the murder route, he saw it. All of it. He watched you do it.
But
just keep that in mind.
Keep that in mind. And you know what? I guess we should also bring up that the game introduced an interesting mechanic called karma,
Yeah.
which I don't think we've talked about. Everything you do in the previous games had a decision tree that went along with it. In this game, there's a karma stat. And that karma stat is very much like you would see on tabletop RPGs or things like that at the time, where it determined sort of your bad or good nature. So things like making Timmy cry would give you minus 50 karma. Breaking up the marriage would give you minus 50 karma. Killing anybody gives you minus 100 karma. Killing everybody as the pint-sized slasher, because you're a kid when you're in there. You're literally given the body of a child, by the way. You get minus 400 karma, or activating the failsafe, you get 300 karma.
Yeah, activating the failsafe is actually considered good because you are releasing them from the hell that they're living in.
You're committing mercy. But let's say for the sake of this argument, you did the failsafe one because screw that creepy little girl. James will tell you that he came here seeking some holotapes, memos, or experiments from Braun related to the Gek. He doesn't tell you how he knows Braun was here, but he tells you essentially he knew that he was here. But when he got here, Braun trapped him in Tranquility Lane as the dog, essentially convinced him to get in the pod so that he could show him the experiments or notes, and trapped him there as the dog, forced for his own torture. And then after this, James says that he's going to go back to Rivet City and he's going to meet up with Dr. Lee and resume Project Purity. And this ends the one quest of finding your father, the main quest, and then a whole other one called the Waters of Life start, which is essentially you're going to help bring purity. You're going to help bring pure water to the Capital Wasteland because, man, we're going to die without it.
Yeah, and at this point, this is where certain factions that we've talked about in previous episodes of this series coming up. The first being the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel, we mentioned in both Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, they were started in California. They started at the Mariposa military base. They have a kind of, I want to say, somewhere between Luddite and xenophobic view on technology. They feel like technology they should keep it. They should, make sure that they have it, but it shouldn't be allowed to be used by just anybody. Because clearly the excesses of the previous era that led to the Great War are because of technology was out of control. Like too many people had access to too much of it, and they used it to ultimately destroy everything. So yeah, the Brotherhood, at least the ones we see in California, are very much about, yes, sure, we should have power armor, but we should have power armor. You should just have to go off into the wasteland and fight giant mutated rad scorpions with a stick. Because if we let you have this, you'll destroy the world. Which is one of those things where you're like, great, yeah, thanks, guys. But that's their basic mentality. But the ones you meet in Washington are different. And the reason they're different is at the end of Fallout 2 and in another game called Fallout Tactics, which has been considered non-canon for years, but suddenly starting to not, the Fallout had kind of a split. Like the people who didn't, the Brotherhood had a split. The people in the Brotherhood of Steel who didn't want to just repress everybody and keep technology out of everyone's hands, but actually wanted to maybe use it to make people's lives better. So they're kind of like if the Brotherhood of Steel and the followers of the Apocalypse had a conversation, and the Brotherhood was like, maybe you have some points. Those people eventually just were so at odds with the elders back home in the West that they made a blimp. They essentially made a hydrogen dirigible and flew towards California. They flew away from California towards the east. One of their airships ended up in Chicago, which will not, I don't know if we're ever going to talk about Tactics because it's a lot. Tactics has got some serious stuff going on in terms of whether or not it's canon.
Yeah, that one I think we'll wind up skipping just because, well, we can talk about the pieces that matter.
Yeah, we're already kind of, we're trying to get a lot into 4 episodes. But one of another of the airships, the I think maybe 2 of them, got to DC. Mm-hmm. They got to the Pentagon because, again, remember that they were built. The Brothers of Steel originally started as a group of U.S. Army soldiers. That's who they were. So when the remnants of the Brothers of Steel get to the the remains of the Pentagon, it's still intact. The Pentagon was built to survive even nuclear exchange. It's still there, and they know the codes to get in because it's not like anybody changed them, so they get in and they find it's a treasure trove. It's got all this technology. They've got tanks, they've got bombs, they've got guns, vertibird, armor, power armor. They've got everything.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I think that sets up the Brotherhood, but I think we should talk about how you wind up finding them. Because I think that's that's kind of important because it involves another one of the factions. Right. So as you make your way back to Rivet City, where, you talk with your dad, you get all this information, and James tells you that him and Dr. Lee led a team of Rivet City scientists to the memorial with the intent to restart I think it was the Jackson Memorial, to restart the project.
I thought it was the Jefferson Memorial.
Or Jefferson Memorial. Thank you. Yes, that is correct.
There is a Jackson Memorial. I hope not.
And you're asked to do some routine maintenance on the underground. During the time that you're out and about performing the maintenance, another faction invades the memorial, and this is the Enclave. Now,
we will be getting to them. We've mentioned them before, but keep the Enclave in your head.
The Enclave is important, and we've talked about them in the past. But I mean, the short version is it's basically a military organization formed out of the remnants of the pre-war United States. They've wind up coming in. They want the project. They want to take over this project because this is a huge power move.
Yeah, and this is a technology that will have repercussions across North America.
Yes.
Because while DC has particularly got irradiated water, there are plenty of other places that have irradiated water. And it's the number one thing making it hard to survive.
Yes.
So if you can control this process, you can basically tell people, it's very simple. Do what we want, and we will give you clean water. Oppose us, and you will die out here.
So instead of giving them this after the Autumn, who is the Colonel Autumn, one of the representatives of the Enclave, shoots one of the scientists, as James essentially says that the facility is not operational, we can't do anything for you, tries to get them to leave them alone. He floods the chamber with a bunch of radiation in order to stop the military leader from taking control of it. You're on the other side of glass as this happens. You are not being affected by this, but he is, as is the Colonel. James dies and tells you to run, and Autumn winds up injecting himself with an anti-radiation serum. This is likely the first instance of Rad-X that we see in the Wastelands, but it's a very concentrated form that is in a syringe that just gets jammed right in, not a caplet.
Yeah, it's not Radaway. It's much better.
So then you flee with Dr. Lee, who survived and is the only one that has any information about this project now. And you flee to the Brotherhood of Steel base known as the Citadel. This is the place that they've been building up since getting here, which is essentially a giant fort. And we're talking, you get there and it is a construction site. They are building a fortress. They are literally building a citadel.
Yeah, out of the remnants of the Pentagon. Essentially, if you ever look at what happened in Rome after the collapse of the Roman Empire, a lot of the buildings that you see now were built literally using bricks and materials from classical structures that are now gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're doing with the Pentagon. They are using the Pentagon as raw materials to build their fort. And it's a big fort.
And it's a secure fort.
Yeah, it is the single biggest and most secure location in DC. And what's really interesting here is this is an example of one of the things that the story does well, in that the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave are kind of like mirrors of each other.
For different reasons.
For different reasons. They're both remnants of the pre-war structure. One is as remnants of the U.S. Army. The other is remnants of the U.S. government. They're both kind of obsessed with technology and gaining control of it. The Brotherhood to keep it away from people, or in the case of the DC Brotherhood, possibly to help people with it. The Enclave wants to control it because they see it as the way to establish control of the entire area and rebuild the society they want to rebuild.
Now, one thing I would like to point out, too, is this is where we talk about Fallout games plant seeds that come into fruition later on.
Yep.
when you get to the Citadel, there's a chance that if you go around and you encounter, talk to people like you should, because it's a game that it rewards exploration, you're going to come across somebody named Arthur Maxon, a boy who will become important in Fallout 4.
Yeah, he is the descendant of the original Roger Maxon who founded the Brotherhood, Colonel Maxon.
Colonel Maxon, that is correct.
Who is first mentioned in Fallout. And Arthur is, at the time, when you're playing the Lone Wanderer, Arthur's fine.
Yeah.
He's a kid. He's got a crush on Sarah Lyons, who is the daughter of Elder Lyons, who led them there in the first place. And both Elder Lyons and Sarah Lyons, who leads, I believe it's called the Lions Pride, which is like the strike force of these particular Brotherhood of Steel people. They're both much more of the opinion that, yes, it is possible. It is necessary for us to control technology, but you don't have to be a racist. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to kill ghouls and super mutants. We can leave them alone, and as long as they're not attacking you. If they attack you,
that's
do what
different.
you got to do. Yeah. But if they're not, leave them alone. When you find technology, sure, collect it. But if people are using it, leave them alone. You don't just steal it from them. But if you find a big supply of it, grab it and bring it here, because it's better that we have it. And it's Madison Lee, I think, who tells you to go there, because while she's not super a fan of the Brotherhood of Steel, this particular Brotherhood of Steel and her have worked together before, because Elder Lyons and her are, I want to say, simpatico. They understand each other. And so she's like, look, if the Enclave's here, these are the only people who can help,
because they are directly opposed to the Enclave.
Yeah. The Enclave are like, this version of the Brothers of Steel are like, okay, let the ghouls that aren't trying to eat us alone. Let the super mutants just live, as long as they're not doing anything. If they're coming after people or whatever, yeah, sure, kill them. And let's try and help. We have a responsibility to do more than just hoard this stuff, which is why they got kicked out of the East Coast, the West Coast in the first place. It's why they're on these. They wanted to get a whole continent between them because their view are so diametrically opposed.
Which is also why they wanted to essentially be protectors, not be hoarders.
Yeah. And so what you end up with here is you can do things to decide what you're going to do. You can work with the Enclave if you want to. It's an incredibly bad idea, but you can do it. The game will allow you to do it.
The canonical route, however, though, is that you are essentially going to be working with Madison Lee and the remnants of the Brotherhood to essentially finish James's work. You're going to carry on your father's legacy.
You're going to get Project Purity off the ground. You're going to use all the stuff that he found and the stuff that he hasn't found yet. You're going to go get it, and you're going to set up Project. And so now you're basically working with the Brotherhood of Steel to do this, which means that you have. We'll get back to that, but keep that in mind. The Brotherhood of Steel, Elder Lyons, Sarah Lyons, and the others are helping you do this.
I'm gonna kind of move through this since we don't have a whole lot of time left. Yep. But you're sent off to Vault 87 to find a Gek, because that's where you've heard that one is located. There's a couple different ways of getting in there. One of which is actually going through Little Lamplight, which is a society of children in a cavern led by Mayor Robert McCready.
You'll hear about him later.
You'll hear about him later for sure. And then, or the other one is through Murder Pass, which we can talk about a little bit later if we have time. But regardless, once you're inside, you wind up meeting a super mutant named Fox, who then tells you that this was a testing site for the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or the FEV, and the source of the super mutants in the Capital Wasteland. Now, the interesting thing is he's smart.
Yeah, he's much more like the ones that the Master had.
And we're talking like the not the drones, but like the ones that actually kept their personality. Like these are essentially, like, you could tell that they were part of a similar experimentation. Yeah,
he is capable of not just normal speech, but actually he's got a vocabulary that's a little hard to, sometimes you're like, what does that mean? Like he is very smart. Fox is like not just smart, but also philosophical.
But then,
which, of course, comes into play. But go for it, Joe.
But you wind up getting the Gek, and you wind up leaving through the whatever various means you leave through, only to be ambushed and captured by the Enclave. You are then taken to their base at Raven Rock, where you are actually freed by the Enclave leader, President John Henry Eden. There's a problem with it, though. He's not a person. Matt, would you like to tell him what he is?
He is the voice of Malcolm McDowell personifying a robot that is no, not a robot. Sorry, no,
An AI computer. Yep.
An AI computer. He doesn't even have a mobile body. He's just an AI computer that basically. It's fascinating to listen to this whole performance because it's a really good example of how acting can really fill in a story concept, because McDowell plays him as almost sounding like he is going through a database of platitude.
Yeah.
And just finding the most appropriate platitude and putting that out there. So he says, like, well, corn home Americana, my friends. Like he sounds like a parody of every politician making a speech ever. And it's really good. Eden is one of the most interesting things ever because it's like, imagine if, how Star Trek Voyager, they had the emergency medical hologram. He's kind of like the emergency presidential program. We don't have a president. The president got blown up on that oil rig in Fallout 2. Quick, activate the backup president.
I mean, it very much is like that. But you don't actually wind up getting to meet him directly, not unless you decide to work with the Enclave earlier on. But on your way to a private audience with him, Colonel Autumn decides that, no, I've had enough of this AI president, and then starts taking command of the Enclave military, which is a separate branch. So there are little politicians and they have their own military, ordering them to kill you so that you can't continue doing what you're doing because they have the GEC now. They have you, they have the GEC. What do they need anything else for? So you can fight your way to Eden's office. That's where you discover that he's a sentient Zax, which is a supercomputer, like Matt said, who took control of the Enclave after the Enclave's defeat in Fallout 2 30 years ago. Eden wishes to repeat the plan of then President Dick Richardson, which I always thought was a funny name because basically it's Dick. Using Project Purity to infect the waters with a modified strain of FEV that will make it toxic to any mutated life. This will kill most life in the wasteland, including humans, who all are affected at some level by the FEV if you are living in the wasteland.
Yeah, the virus is everywhere. It's just that for most people, it didn't do much, but it's in you. You've got the virus in you, and that means it'll kill you.
Because they believe that the people that were in the Enclave, due to their genetic, and I'm going to air quote purity here, because of their isolation and inbreeding, will be immune and free to take control of the area. Which
this is not true, by the way.
We know it's not true, but they don't know that. They're sort of cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs here.
They're going to kill themselves as well. But they'll do it in the name of purity.
So this is where you're given a sample of the new FEV, and you're given a choice, either to leave peacefully or convince Eden to self-destruct the entire base. Either way, you escape Raven's Rock and return to the Citadel. With the knowledge that you possess and the GEC now in your possession, because you take that shit with you when you leave, and the means to activate Project Purity, the Brotherhood assault the Jefferson Memorial in one of my favorite moments, because it introduces one of our favorite giant robots that exists in the series. Liberty Prime version 1.0 is online.
Democracy is the right of all sentient beings. Yeah, Liberty Prime is great. Liberty Prime is great every time Liberty Prime pops up. Liberty Prime is kudos to you, Bethesda, for the creation of Liberty.
Liberty Prime is also why I chose to buy that particular Fallout deck for Magic the Gathering. Anyway, you wind up helping them. You take the fight to Jefferson Memorial, and you get into the control room of Project Purity, and you are confronted with Colonel Autumn, and you have the choice to try to persuade them to give up or kill them. Regardless, Dr. Lee informs the Lone Wanderer that the purifier is ready to be activated. However, the activation code must be input manually from the lethally irradiated control room. To make matters worse, the purifier has been damaged and will self-destruct if not activated. So this is where we get to the point where we talk about that ending that we don't like, because at this point, your party is massive. You have options of so many folks at your side, several of which are immune to radiation. Two of which in particular are immune without power armor, because you can't,
because you have a ghoul, right?
There's a ghoul companion who happens to be dressed very much similar to the garb of the that you would have seen in Fallout 1 of the Wanderer, over the main protagonist, with the Mad Max type armor and setup, but you also have a super mutant with you as well, who is absolutely immune to this. It's a weird choice.
And what's really weird about it is when you turn to these characters and say, hey, buddy, can you go in and do this thing that won't kill you but will absolutely kill me? They say no.
Yep.
I mean, Kayron, who's the ghoul, kind of makes sense from him because he's a jerk. Like it's not like Kayron ever does anything for anybody. But Fox is like this philosophical and super smart guy. And this is a dumb thing for him to say. He's like, "This, you must do this. This is on you.
This is your choice, your legacy type thing." Right?
And it's just dumb. But essentially, you can choose to not go in which case the purifier blows up and we're all,
everybody dies.
Yeah. Or you go in and you can use that sample of FEV. You can put it in there and kill everybody. You can absolutely do that. If you're angry, you got stuck in this dumb ending, you can make it kill everyone. Or you can sacrifice yourself and not do that.
That is the canonical ending. The canonical ending is written in the epilogue for Fallout 3 by Moira Brown, a character who you will have interacted with at some point. You get, essentially, there's a terminal entry that says that 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, because it was 2297, 20 years. Time, math, hard, haven't had caffeine. How you changed the wasteland and its society because of the conflict between the Brotherhood and the Enclave, what you chose to do with the Enclave, because essentially you gutted the Enclave. Like, even if you took the vial, you, at this point, there's a handful of them left. There's not much there.
Yep.
And if you did the canonical ending, which is blowing up the base of the Enclave.
Talk the computer president into blowing himself up. Yeah.
The only ones that were left were General Autumn, who you either convinced to stand down and join your side, Colonel Autumn, or you kill them. Like you dismantle.
Those are your options. Yeah.
You dismantle the Enclave and scatter them. They're not gone. They're still around, but they're not.
There's other Enclave bases. There's other the Enclave are in a cell structure, so it's kind of like bugs. But
at least in the Capital Wasteland, they're sort of gone.
Yeah, there's nothing.
But Moira writes about how you, as the Lone Wanderer, sort of did all these things, and then you find that's the ending for your character, unlike with 1 and 2, and the possible links to 3, because there are possible links between 2 and 3, that between the main character's bloodline, I guess would be the best way to put it, potentially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We don't know why they made this choice, why they sort of chose to maybe end it here. And part of the thought is that they made a choice thinking that they weren't going to get another opportunity to make a Fallout game. And they wanted to give what was popular at the time in the early 2000s was sort of the hero's ending, right? The noble sacrifice for the greater good, yada, yada, yada.
Except that they had created a game where there were so many options around it that it didn't make sense that you couldn't use any of them. To the point where when they put out the first of their DLCs, they retconned the ending.
Would you like to talk about that? Go ahead.
Yeah, and see now, on the one hand, I think it was a good thing to retcon the ending, but on the other hand, I think having to retcon the ending says even worse things about the ending. I want to say is it called Broken Steel?
Broken Steel.
Yeah, in the Broken Steel expansion, you basically wake up. Like after you've done all that and you get the ending and you wake up and they're like, oh, cool, you're all right. It's a good thing that, your friend who's immune to radiation went in there and did the thing. And you're like, what? The Fox is like, yeah, no biggie. I don't know if it was Fox or Sarah Lyons actually, but somebody else goes in and
Fox.
Goes in and does the thing that you were like, yeah, the thing that we all knew you could do. Why didn't you? Or whatever. So from there, then you basically go forth and help completely wipe out the Enclave even more so. Like it's like even more wiped out now. Like that the first expansion is basically just there's also a group of Brotherhood of Steel, like I want to call them like rebels. I don't know what else to call them. They're like exiles. They've exiled themselves from this group of the Brotherhood of Steel, but they're hardliners of the original Brotherhood of Steel doctrine. They're like, why are we helping people? This isn't our mission. Our mission is to protect and safeguard technology so it doesn't get into the wrong hands. All of the stuff we're doing with water purifiers, that's great, but why are we doing it? That's not our mission. That's not our remit. So they're like, I forget what they're called. I think they're called renegades or something. But you run into them. You have confrontations with them. You get to see the kind of divide in the East Coast Brotherhood of Steel, that there are still quite a few of them that are like hardline, no, this is wrong. We shouldn't be helping people. We should absolutely not be letting super mutants and ghouls exist. Like that's crazy. We should kill them. And they're important because they are going to show up again. You are going to see these guys again. So there's that. The other expansions, one is Mothership Zeta, which is great, but I don't know if it's easily explainable in the time we have left.
Yeah, let's take a minute because there was 5 DLCs that were released. There was Operation Anchorage, which was essentially you go into a military simulation for the liberation of Anchorage, of the invasion of for liberating the liberation of Anchorage, Alaska, because the Chinese own Alaska at this point.
They have invaded and they've taken it.
We talked about the Broken Steel, where you defy death and defeat the remaining enclave of the Capital Wasteland. There's also the Pit, which is probably one of the most interesting ones of them. Yeah. Where you go through Pittsburgh. It first loads the player where you're informed of a new radio distress signal from a runaway slave from the Pit named Werner. The Pittsburgh is a raider industrial town, where it's essentially all raiders. And when they capture people, they turn them into slaves. But Werner says that he needs help in retrieving a cure for a plague of mutations that is hitting the town. And it was developed by the Pit's raider boss, Asher. And you basically have to take Asher down and get your stuff. And you operate as the big hero. But that could potentially have repercussions in later games. Maybe. We'll talk about that maybe with Fallout 4. Then you have Point Lookout. Where Point Lookout, you visit this point via a ferry, and you help a ghoul named Desmond Lockhart, along with other residents of the area. And then, like Matt said, there's Mothership Zeta. Fallout's always had this love affair with aliens, especially in the idea of aliens coming down to Earth in a post-apocalyptic area and seeing what the heck happened as a case study. In this one, you are essentially aboard the Mothership Zeta and are fighting to escape your way off. And with a bunch that's of as deep as it goes.
Bunch of different people who are from different periods of time.
Yes.
Some of the people on that satellite are from like the Edo period or what have you, Civil War. Yeah, they're from. I have a theory that the aliens are actually responsible for Vault Tech, but that's later. We can talk about that later.
We can absolutely talk about that later because I'm absolutely on that train as well. Fallout 3 was not a perfect game, and it wasn't a awful game either. It is definitely It's definitely my least favorite of the series, partially because, again, the story almost seemed haphazard with the main storyline. And there were several things that just either didn't get explained, like why your father took you to the vault, like why that was the goal, or, a lot of the Enclave stuff like barely gets touched. But there are things that I do like about it. Like it really establishes that Brotherhood of Steel splinter group, and the one that we have sort of come to basically identify with and know as sort of the primary Brotherhood of Steel in recent years. And it sort of gives them the legs on which they sort of take a run with. And I think that that's really, really important. And it also starts the cascading effect of why the East Coast is able to start recovering, and thus gives you the ability to have places like Diamond City and other places that we find in Fallout 4 that are able to exist, and it's only because of what happens in this game in the Capital Wasteland.
Like to the point where in future games in Fallout 4, it's even mentioned that the main thing that the Capital Wasteland produces is clean water.
Yeah, unlike everywhere else.
They are spreading it. They are sending it to other places. So, yeah, there's a lot to Fallout 3. But the problem is, I think part of it is that I think Bethesda, there's that feeling of Bethesda always puts a lot of love into their side quests. And there are great side quests. There's the Republic of Dave.
Yep, Republic of Dave.
Republic of Dave. There's the antagonizer and all that stuff. There's a ton of really good, really fun side quests, but they're not part of the main quest. And it's almost like the main quest is something you almost avoid doing to do the side quests, and that's going to come up again. Fallout 4, that's a thing. But yeah, there is a lot to like about Fallout 3. But I think Joe and I are both in agreement that the next game we are likely to talk about is a much better example of what to do with the framework that was built for Fallout 3.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, we have 2 more episodes left because there's no way we're cramming everything into one episode for Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4. The games are too big. And you can start to see, like when we're talking about the next one is going to be Vegas, because that is in the timeline. What happens? That is the next
about 5 years. It's 5 years after the end of this.
It is exactly 5 years after the end of Fallout 3. And then Fallout 4 is 5 years after that. So we will get to that. We will talk about it. And I think it should be a very good time. Is there anything else you want to say before we end it here, Matt?
I mean, there's a lot we could say, but let me put it this way. When you are playing Fallout, the way I think to experience the story is to try and weave in a lot of the side contents and go to places like Megaton and just see all the ways that the story is being revealed to you through side quests and through stuff you find. Like, This is the Fallout game that really starts the thing of finding terminals and data recordings, and it really starts giving you pictures of the world the way it was and how it got to this point and why this location you've went to is the way it is now. And there's a lot of stuff that you can come upon and be like, wow, okay. Like Rivet City, just explore Rivet City. Or when you get to the ruins of the Smithsonian, explore the ruins of the Smithsonian, especially. Oh, like, wow, I mean, seriously, go there. So there's a ton of that. And I think it is, in its way, the environmental storytelling is the real draw of Fallout. It's the real meat of this game. The quests are fine. Like the main narrative storyline's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But as Joe pointed out, a lot of it, you're like, how did James know to go to that vault to get the Gek? But it wasn't there. I mean, how did he know where that Stanislav Braun was there? Like, there's a lot of stuff where you never find out how James knew this. What did James do? Why were you in Vault 101? And if you go back to Vault 101, there's a whole storyline there, but you never have to do it. So you'll never see it, you know?
Nothing leads you there.
Yeah, nothing leads you there. And so you might miss out on stuff that really helps the context of everything. And that's, I think, the both the strength and the weakness of the Bethesda storytelling method. They really like their side quests and they really like environmental storytelling, and as well they should. But sometimes they don't work on the main quest as much. I think really notable examples are Skyrim and Fallout 3, more so than pretty much any other game that they did. It's still a problem in other games, but it's really notable in these two. And I think for Fallout 3, it's also an example because this is the first time that they touched this IP.
Yeah.
This was Interplay before. So yeah, I think one of the reasons that Fallout New Vegas works as well as it does, where in places Fallout 3 stumbled, is because the people working on New Vegas weren't new to Fallout. They were very much not new to Fallout.
They were veterans that had moved on to another game studio that were like, hey, we did that before, we can do it again. Yeah,
and they did. And to a degree, I mean, even though I think Fallout New Vegas is Joe's favorite, it's not my favorite, but it is unquestionably one of the highlights of this. I can't see how you could argue it wasn't. So yeah, that's it for me for now.
Well then, friends, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast, site, and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q and an ads-free site experience. Again, if you've been enjoying this content, please let us know. We are available in our Discord server. And we do have several channels set aside if you happen to have questions for us. You can send those in via email at podcast@blizzardwatch.com. And you can also hit us up on those Discord channels, which is the Q and Podcast Questions channel, whereas a special gift to our Patreon supporters, the Patron Q and Podcast Questions channel is set aside specifically for you, and we tend to look there first. But with that, folks, we'll see you next time.